Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who's Ambassador James Rosapepe. Ambassador Rosapepe served as the U.S. Ambassador to Romania from 1998 to 2001. From 2001 to 2006, he served on the Board of Regents of the University System of Maryland. A former member of the Maryland House of Delegates from 1987 to 1997. He served as Vice Chair of the Ways and Means Committee. From 1995 to 1997, he served as Investment Committee Chair of the Albanian American Enterprise Fund. And from 1989 to 1992, he served as the Deputy Chair of the Maryland Democratic Party. He is currently serving in his second term in the Maryland State Senate, sits on the Education, Health and Environmental Affairs Committee, serving as a Deputy Majority Whip, and is Chairman and CEO of Patuxent Capital Group, LLC, in addition to serving on the boards of several companies and investment funds in Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome with me Ambassador James Rosapepe.
Thank you very, very much. Is there a mic that I can carry out around? I think I'll do that if that's all right. Thank you very much. It's very nice to be with you today. I'm not all that stands between you and dinner, but it's getting close. So I'm sure you've had many, many interesting discussions today. I probably be relatively brief in my opening comments, partially because it's late in the day. Partially because the title of my talk is my central point, and it's somewhat self-evident. But I want to put a little nuance around it and give a couple of perspectives on it. As you heard, I have a background in diplomacy, a background in education, background in business, and have been involved a lot in Europe. I was U.S. Ambassador to Romania. I chaired the Albanian American Enterprise Fund's Investment Committee. I also was chair of Maryland's Sister State Committee with the Leningrad Oblast in Russia in the mid-90s. And today, I'm involved in investment in emerging markets in Latin America, Asia, and in Europe. My own perspective is that a lot of times, governments in particular, overestimate the importance of exercising influence through external relations. And I'm not drawing the distinction between hard power and soft power. I'm drawing the distinction between external relations and domestic performance. And so people say, well, how can Europe be a force in the world if they're only spending 2% of GDP on defense? Or people say, how can the United States be a force in the world if they don't have the kind of public diplomacy efforts that China, for example, has, or other countries have? And those are good questions, and there clearly is a role for external relations, there's a role for defense, there's a role for diplomacy. But I would argue that in the broad sense, in the long-term sense, the core of influence in the international community is driven by domestic success. And I use the three examples of the United States, Europe, and China to illustrate that point. The United States became influential over the past 2.5 centuries, fundamentally as it was successful. Initially, as it was successful in creating a functioning democracy, in protecting a functioning democracy, and then in growing its economy. It was after that that it became a significant military power. That followed the domestic success. If it had not been domestically successful, if democracy had not survived from the late 18th century into the 19th century, into the 20th century, it's hard to believe that the United States, with all the limitations on its influence today, would be as influential a country as it is if it hadn't been successful in the basics of its political system and its economic system. And it's also the case that even in the shorter run, the U.S. was clearly more influential at periods of time when its domestic success was greater than the domestic success of its competitors in the world. So you take the Cold War. If it had been true that the communist economic system in the Soviet Union had been a great success and the market system in the United States had not been a great success, things would have looked very different in the 1980s and the 1990s. That was based on domestic success primarily, in my judgment, that the United States emerged much more influential than Russia did. Similarly, this is certainly borne out, and I think the ambassador from Moldova made this point very eloquently, is obviously the soft power of the European Union vis-a-vis countries like Moldova in the East and other areas is primarily driven by its domestic success. I remember when I was ambassador to Romania in the late 90s, and I would travel around, do town meetings in village squares, in union halls, in schools, in senior citizens communities, wherever it might be. And it was just when Romania had been invited to join the European Union. And I would say, well, one piece of good news for Romania is you've been invited to join the European Union. And what I found was, regardless of the audience, regardless of the education of the audience, the income of the audience, the age of the audience, the geography of the country, the crowd would break out in applause and whoop and holler. And I took to just asking people after my presentation, so explain to me why you were so positive and so excited about joining the European Union. And over and over and over again, I heard from peasants, from working people, from students, from retired people. Well, Western Union's successful. Western Union's peaceful. Western Union's democratic. Western Europe is prosperous. That's what we want to be. And some would put more emphasis on one thing than another. But what if Western Europe in the post-war period had not been successful? What if it had not been peaceful? What if it had not become prosperous? It would not have the influence that it did 10 years ago and does today. Now, obviously, it's all relative. So it's Western Europe's success compared to the Warsaw Pact's lack of success in a lot of ways. And similarly today, with the problems in Europe, which are very severe, the economic problems of Europe, there clearly are significant political problems, that has definitely undermined Western Europe's influence in Eastern Europe and around the world. It's success that brings influence, failure that reduces influence. And now we come to the case of China. 30 years ago, China, for most of its neighbors, for Western Europe, for Latin Americans, for Africans, for Americans, was on the radar screen. It was a country that was relevant in some military ways, in some diplomatic ways. But it was not a major influence either in the region or the world. And what changed that? We all know what changed it. What changed it was China got more successful at being China. It got more successful at raising the living standards of its own people, became more successful at raising economic growth, became more successful at transportation and education and all those things. They got lots of problems, for sure. They haven't solved all their problems. But because they concentrated on the domestic, they concentrated on making their country better, they have now become, obviously, a very significant and influential force in their region and in the world. And similarly, in terms of the U.S.-Chinese relation, I was in China about 3 years ago for a conference. It was 2009, right after the financial crisis, the worldwide financial crisis in 08, and meeting with a whole variety of top Chinese financial policymakers, some business people. And I hadn't been in China in many years, although I obviously met with Chinese here and other places. But what was most striking to me in simply discussions like this with Chinese officials was how much less influential the United States was with China than it used to be. Our economic model, our advice, our interests were not met with as much credibility, as much respect as they would have been 10 years before. And it's a pretty simple explanation. Is Chinese look at American economic performance, in particular, over that previous decade, which obviously led to the economic crisis that hurt China, hurt the United States, hurt most of the world, and said, well, you're not doing such a great job managing your own economy. You're not doing as good a job as you thought you were doing in managing your own business. And that inherently made them, understandably, less influenced by American perspectives. My point is simply this. I think however you look at it, and we can take many other examples, and I'm sure there's some contrary examples, but I would argue they're the exception rather than the rule, that besides all the efforts that are done in external relations, the fact of the matter is that national state influence and regional influence in the world over time is primarily driven by domestic performance. So what does that mean? It means a lot. It means a lot in terms of country strategies, whether one's a small country or a big country, an old country or a new country, is if you care about being influential in the world, either because you want to protect yourself from people who don't like you and might cause you trouble, or you believe, and not every country believes this for sure, but certainly Americans do and others do, believe they have a universal vision. If you want to be influential, the place to put the investment, the primary investment, the priority, is in getting things right in your own country, because that's where most of your external influence and power will come from. So let me just stop there. Look forward to disagreements, questions, different approaches. Who'd like to go first? Please. You've got your own microphone, even better. If you'd love to know your name and where you're from, what you do.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. My name is Anna Gumbo. I'm from the European Peace University in Austria, originally from Cameroon. You just said that in order to be an emerging power in the world, you have to begin by doing things first right in your country. And I have this notion, maybe from debate back in my university, that China is emerging as an influential power out of US and Japan, and will soon be the first in the world that is controlling the world aside America. What is your opinion on this?
Sure.
Is it doing things right?
No, it's a great question. The truthful answer is I don't know. I think they're doing a lot of things right, but they got very hard problems. And so I don't think it's at all clear that they have figured out the path forward. And it's all the things that everybody's familiar with. Is, you know, they've opened up the economic system in a lot of ways. That's been very successful in a lot of ways. They've kept control of the economic system in a lot of ways. That also has been pretty successful. So in that sense, in a way, that they probably have a better balance of that than a lot of other places. But their political system, I think, is really challenged. And we've seen some of that in the newspapers with this transition of power and these behind-the-scenes struggles that I don't think any of us really know what's going on. But it is very hard, as we've seen around the world over centuries, but certainly in our own time, it's very hard to have a open economic system and a closed political system. Now, maybe they'll figure out how to do it. I'm not ruling that out. But I think what is likely to be the case is that they are likely to have some bumps in the road, and they're likely to either reform their approach in a gradual way because they figure out how to do it, or have some crisis. I think that's entirely possible. The other issue for the Chinese, again, that everybody's very familiar with, is their demographics. Is they do have this problem about growing old before they grow rich, and so it's not obvious. It is obvious that you can't grow. The trees don't grow to the sky, so they can't keep growing at the rates that they are growing. They're not growing at the rates they were growing. They may have some more good years. I'm not saying they won't. But there are real economic limitations to what they're doing. So I come back to my first answer. I don't know.
Yeah, if I want to follow up on this, there's this notion that they have a culture where they accept everything, but they don't agree to doing these things. Like, for example, you can tell in a session, you said this would be nice to be done this way, and if this goes like this, the economic system will improve like this. They'll just say, yeah, but when in actually implementing it or doing it, they do it the way they think they want to do it. Do you think this aspect is like going to way back on their performance or on their system to improve their own economy?
You're talking about China once again?
Yeah.
I truly don't know. I really don't want to talk about something that I don't really think I have a useful contribution to make on that one. Try a question I can answer.
The problem is I don't have the list of the questions you may answer or not answer, so I will just give you whatever I have.
Fair, absolutely. No, that's fair. That's very fair. That's very fair.
Okay, my name is Zeke Botokuma. I may have something in common in terms of state belonging. I am a professor of philosophy at Morgan State University.
Oh, great. Oh, terrific.
And a first-time voter, so
Oh.
whatever I say, it's very serious. because I have
Terrific.
a
God
new
bless
title
you for
now.
voting.
Okay. I was very interested in the statement that foreign influence should be built at home first. And I am one of the people who are interested in the outcome of what happened or is going to happen with the Obamacare. And the reason why I'm raising this point is because
He had a good day.
Yes, that's the right time to talk about it, because even though it is not necessarily what he talked about, but there is some connection.
Yeah.
One of the policies or the promises that President Obama made before becoming president was dealing with healthcare,
Yep.
not only for this country, but also in the world.
Yep.
One of the initiatives is the Global Healthcare Initiative.
Right.
And my point is the following. If Obamacare fails, how is Obama administration going to be in a position of authority and force to take care of something that big as global health care policy? So I see the importance of successful
Right.
policy in this area of care in America as a way of having a positive influence
Right.
of healthcare for the whole world.
Right.
So I wonder if you have some comment about that.
Well, I do. I hadn't thought of the issue exactly that way. But there are many people here who are from countries other than the United States and have a better perspective on this than I do as an American. But I've never had the impression that America's model of health care, finance, and delivery was a tremendous model for the rest of the world. I've not found a lot of people saying, we want to be like the United States. We want to pay 50% more of GDP for health care and have worse outcomes than many other industrial countries have. So I'm not sure we're terribly influential to begin with on health care structure. What we are influential on, I think, tends to be on the scientific side, and tends to be on the treatment side, and tends to be on the biomedical side. Because obviously, we have a culture and an economic system that has been very successful at promoting technical innovation in healthcare. And so we have been influential. I think we're going to continue to be influential. But I don't think the way we finance and organize our healthcare system, it's not a model for the United States, which is why President Obama is trying to change it. And I don't think there are a lot of people around the world who look at our country as a model, but it's a good example in the sense, and I can tell you a lot of people in the United States look at other countries, particularly higher income industrial countries, whether it's Canada, whether it's France, whether it's Germany, whether it's the UK, as models, influential models for what needs to be done in the United States, which really does underline my point, which is if you're successful at home, that will make you more influential abroad. Please.
And the final question, because Ambassador Smith is here.
Hi, my name is Kellen Abraham. I'm a recent graduate and a Fulbright hopeful right now.
Recent graduate of where?
University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Great.
Yep. And so my question, we've been hearing a lot today about how the United States needs to project itself onto the rest of the world so they can accept parts, however we want to present ourselves. And we've also been criticized as Americans as not knowing much about the rest of the world as a whole. And so I was just wondering if you see a trend towards the success of our nation not being our GDP or economic or anything, but our openness to other cultures, if that in itself could be a success to take ideas from other countries and grow through that.
Oh, it's a great question, and I agree with it. A perfect example is immigration. One of the things that America, with all its problems with immigration, does better than a lot of countries of the world is immigration. We have our arguments about it, and we have our fights about it, but they're much tougher in a lot of other countries. I mean, America is still very much a land of immigrants. I mean, there's a reason why politically the U.S. Supreme Court earlier this week basically knocked down the anti-immigrant laws in Arizona, because even the very conservative Republicans on the Supreme Court kind of get it, that America is a land of immigrants, that the federal policy is an integral part of what makes America successful. And so that's a great example. Our culture is quite open to immigration. That's why we have lots of foreign students here. That's why we have lots of people who come here. Italians, I'm Italian-American. I was born in Italy. I have a namesake who was a great uncle named Giacomo Rosapepe, who came with a couple of brothers to the United States in the latter part of the 19th century. And the brothers stayed, and Giacomo went home after 10 years. Well, half of all the Italians who immigrated to the United States between 1880 and 1920 went back to Italy. They said, America's a great country, but we're going home. Half of them stayed. One of the great failures of American immigration policy today is we have these crazy immigration laws, which basically mean that if you somehow get in here legally, you overstay your visa, or you walk across the Texas border or whatever you can, you can't go home again if you decide it's isn't working out. And so we end up with this sort of crisis of immigration here, which is very serious and which the president is trying to address. But the larger point is that there's a reason why the anti-immigration movement in the United States really has failed, because America fundamentally does accept immigrants and fundamentally is open in exactly the way you're talking about. And there are other countries that are not nearly as successful. There are ones that are more successful. I don't mean to say America's the only one. But that's a big cultural difference, is whether one is open to immigration or not open to immigration. I think that's very, very much one of America's great strengths. Thank you very much. I think I
have a question myself.
Oh my gosh! The moderator gets to ask an extra one after the.
I'm going to save it for the panel discussion now.
Okay, good. Okay, good.
Ambassador Smith is here as well.
Good.
But
thank you very, very much. It's been great being with all of you. Thanks an awful lot.
If you could please join in expressing our gratitude, Ambassador Rosapepe. Thank you.